All right, we are back. Solo episode today. Back to three podcasts this week. Still want to get some more, but life has really been um, heck of a trip. Heck of a trip. Awesome. But it kind of leaves me with a little bit less time than I would like to prepare this podcast and prepare guests and really get things grooving. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, first of all, it's good that I have so much going on. I just love to be busy and I hate the feeling of not being productive. But secondly, it's just a totally different, just a very different experience doing this solo. And it's fun and it takes time to build anyway, I think. It takes time to get people on. It takes time to get quality guests and to build up a presence. But I mean, maybe I'm just imagining it because I'm just being optimistic or hopeful, but I think I'm getting a little bit more viewership, a little bit more traction. I'm primarily using Twitter at this point as a base and a way of posting and kind of building any kind of viewership. That's primarily where I'm posting it. I'm not really doing it on Instagram, I'm not really doing on Facebook. I don't even necessarily really know why. um, I I think I just like Twitter. I like the format. And I mean, it's the place where I get my news, the place where I spend the most time. There's a special grilling episode because I'll be making food. It's our Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah today, which is the new year of the Jewish calendar, the lunar calendar, and got got a seltzer over here. So I'm grilling food for. We're having my cousins, a couple and their babies sleep over, and my sister-in-law stay over for the holiday. So a lot of people, a lot of food. We have guests coming for meals, friends coming for meals, and I think we're going out for one meal to other people's house. So there's one meal we don't have to cook for in the next 3 days, but there's a lot to do. So we've been working on it, and I'm out here grilling while I do this. I'm trying to do. I think I'm going to try to do alcohol-free October. I'm not going to call it a completely sober October, but I'm going to try to do alcohol-free October. And today's October 2nd, and it's already harder than I think it is. Um, and it's really interesting because I don't know, I have a very weird relationship with alcohol because I kind of like it primarily for its taste. I think that out of 10 times that I'm consuming alcohol, I'm probably getting drunk or like drinking to get drunk. I think a lot of people do, like for the sake of like actually getting getting drunk and kind of like losing yourself and shutting yourself off a little bit. But it's kind of a little bit, alcohol is a little bit more about a kind of lifestyle and culture that I've been a part of for years and years of my life at this point. I have, I'm into, if you've listened to any episodes with a bunch of my friends, I'm into a lot of different types of craft beer, and I have a real palate and taste and sense for tequila and scotch, and not really bourbon as much, but and again, it's kind of just more about the taste and like, and it's also a social activity. It's something that like it gives you something to do with your hands, gives you a place to go if like it's a Sunday afternoon or a Wednesday night and you have a long day and you want to stop by a pub for a Guinness. It's very, and then not even that. I mean, then the whole like craft beer world has its own little world of, and it's not, and it, I mean, it's getting rapidly bigger, but it's a whole microcosm. It's a whole little like society in and of itself. There's the people that are, the IPA fans, the stout fans. You have the microbreweries that are like, really prestigious, known countrywide. And there's actually a whole market. My buddy Herman, who was on the podcast once, great guy. He will participate in craft beer trades. So he'll literally, decide he'll reach out to someone from New York and say, hey, can you go to this small brewery for me on Long Island, or go to this place in upstate New York, and get a 4 pack of this new IPA for me. And the person would be like, sure, but there's going to be a mule fee. They call them beer mules. So he's like, there's going to be a mule fee, $10, $15, $20, and some people will even charge 90, $100 for a regular 4 pack of an IPA from a prestigious brewery, which is truly crazy in my opinion, because one of the benefits about of the fact that the brewery world has really taken off so much is that there's a lot of beer really available almost any state that you're in. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia has great beer. I don't really know so much about South Carolina, but Florida has great beer. The whole West Coast, Oregon, California, Washington has amazing beer. Denver has amazing beer. Utah has pretty good beer, not incredible. There's just so many states that you could just get it in that it doesn't make sense to me that people are going to be going out of the way, except for the fact that it's a hype. It's a hype, and the demand kind of creates itself in these markets, which is really, really interesting. You take a commodity, which is literally just like it's an IPA, and not to say that these IPAs aren't delicious, they're not great, that they're not really one of a kind. And the truth is that a well-made beer, a well-crafted beer, is really like it's it's really nuanced. And when you drink it, and if you're ever consuming one, and you have a little bit, even if you don't have a full palate for beer, you could tell you're drinking something that had a lot of consideration and thought put into it. Um, there's different textures, there's different bodies, there's different noses, there's different taste profiles based on the type of hops. Because hops are almost like grapes, in the sense that wherever the regions are where you're growing the hops could be could have an effect on the type of and on the way that on the flavoring that the hops have. So, for example, if you have hops, which is a plant, um, if you have a plant that's in California or in the state of Washington, and you try to compare it to a hop that's from Vermont or Maine, they're going to taste extremely different. One's drier, one's fruitier, one almost has like a kind of juicy, fruity, pulpy taste to it. The other one is a little more bitter, a little bit more with a little bit more of a bite to it. And then there's New Zealand hop, and it's really incredible. And so, a really good brewery or a really big beer fan would have would have a very easy time, or have a lot of fun making all of these really fascinating beers. And you consume them. And I mean, like for me, first of all, I didn't realize how sugary they were. They're absolutely poison. But because a lot of these beers, let's say a double IPA or a triple IPA, which is very common around the scene now. I mean, you need that amount of sugar to translate directly into um, the amount of sugar to raise the alcohol level when you're mixing it with the yeast and you're letting it ferment. So a double IPA that's 8.5% alcohol is has a lot more calories and a lot more sugar than a 5% beer, or a 4% Coors or whatever. And and at the end of the day, it's just it's really interesting. And then you have stout. I mean, so you have this whole craft beer world that's a whole community in and of itself, and it is a social world. It does have a lot of social benefits that especially for me, that I really threw myself into. It's just a lot of fun. You meet a lot of people, and you meet people from different states and different places, and the fact is that if you're going to isolate yourself from that scene, then if you're going to isolate yourself from that scene, then you're really cutting yourself off, or at least I feel like I'm cutting myself off socially in a way that is going to be a little difficult to do, even though I don't really care very much about consuming the actual beer. I've been over IPAs. I'm trying to be much healthier just in the way that I consume my food and calories, and I really have been. But one of the ways that I've been doing that is by slowing down on the alcohol and the stouts. And the stouts, which are 12, 13%, almost like a wine, those guys are even unhealthier. These guys are even more sugary and syrupy. And there's one brewery here in Fort Lauderdale, near where I live, called Uncommon Paths. They make these delicious stouts that are kind of like breakfast themed or breakfast style. So you could have like a pancake stout with maple syrup, um, and you can have stouts that are vanilla and coffee flavored. Like really really nice taste profiles. But there are a lot. So the guy at the brewery who wants people to know what they're consuming, I guess, which is really nice and responsible of him. Thank you. Which is nice and responsible of him. He puts the amount of calories that are in each beer um, on the menu next to the beer. So I didn't even realize what that meant, but the stouts were 400, 400, 450, 475 calories for a 4-ounce pour. And I was blown away by that. I couldn't believe it because, I mean, that's an ice. I don't know if it's quite an ice cream sundae. I think an ice cream sundae is more, but that's one of those like Starbucks, vanilla lattes. That's a lot of calories in just one 4-ounce pour, and a 4-ounce pour is a half a beer pour. So beer is usually, or actually less. Beer is usually poured in 12 to 16-ounce cans or pours, um, and this is 4 ounces of that. That's a fraction of what it is. So if you're drinking any kind of regular amount of beer, and you're not really with the craft beer you because it's so heavy and it's so rich and it's so alcoholic, so thick that it's hard to consume more than like 8 ounces of it, or 12 ounces of a couple of different types of them. So you're not really having that much, but just the 400 calories when you have one beer, it's in 4 ounces. It's just really crazy. It's like ice cream sundaes from Carvel or something like that. So overall, I haven't been really consuming that much beer anyway. That I really, and then October came by, and I keep on thinking about, I mean, I guess really the thought. I've heard of dry January. I've kind of heard of sober October. I've only really heard of it since I started listening to Rogan's podcast because he talks about it every now and then. But I was like, I really want to I just want to try. I just want to see. Also, being an Orthodox Jew, um, you know, I mean, you have, Friday night, you say a blessing on the meal before dinner called Kiddush, and it's generally made on wine. And then when you're in synagogue on Saturday day, after shul, you make a blessing before you eat. And generally, it tends to be a little bit of a social setting where after prayers, after synagogue, after temple, you will everyone will have a couple of drinks together, some scotch, some tequila, some whatever, and then go home to your meal. So alcohol is really like a big part of was I guess a big part of my life. And while I've been cutting back on a lot of it, it feels weird to try to commit myself to that, but to doing a whole month without it. But and I was thinking about it while I was doing it, or while I was deciding this, but one of the things that I realized was I hadn't gone a month without consuming any alcohol since I was probably 17. I started the first time I ever drank socially or recreationally for fun was after I graduated high school at graduation parties. It was the first time I think I remember I remember that um, I knew my dad like the taste of some alcohol. I didn't know anything about alcohol. I didn't know about vodka or tequila or whiskey or smoky scotch or rum or anything. I didn't know anything about anything. Um, and I'm at a graduation party at someone's house, and someone made a whole little business while we were in high school of buying, let's say a handle, which is, one of those huge bottles of vodka, the cheapest vodka you could find, at $15, $20. And he would charge everyone that came to the party, he would charge them $5, drink as much as you want. And he knew that most people in high school are not drinking more than a couple of shots. A lot of times people were like me, they're first time drinkers. You need 3 or 4 shots and you're, at most, if you're a big guy like me, and the first time you're drinking, and you're done, and a lot of times people just have one or two shots and just call it a day. So this guy was coming home. This guy was making a ton of money. This guy was making a ton of money selling liquor for graduation parties. And so I'm at this graduation party, and I got some vodka in my cup, got my red Solo cup, feeling cool, looking cool. I mean, taste it, and I know that my dad likes to taste. I knew that if you're mature and you're cool and you're whatever, you're supposed to like it. It's supposed to, it's delicious. So I'm drinking this warm $15 crappy bottle of vodka, and I'm like, and my friend's like, you want a chaser? And I'm like, what's a chaser? Like, something to take away the taste. It's like, no, this is delicious, man. I love this stuff. And I'm like, I'm gagging on it. It's disgusting. But since then, I've gone a week. I don't even know if I've gone 2 weeks without consuming any kind of alcohol. But it's been, I mean, I'm almost 29, and that was when I was 17. So it's been like almost 12 years since I've gone a week without drinking, which is pretty crazy. Like, it's pretty crazy. I guess, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little bizarre, but that's just the way things went. So I'm going to try it out. I'm sure it's not going to be easy, but I think that it will be. I think that it'll be worth it. I think it'll be productive. I think that I'll probably feel great, and I also want to show myself that I could do this and that. Because I've been looking for an excuse again. When I was in college, I would drink a lot for the sake of getting drunk and having fun. There was something exciting about turning my brain off and just talking to anyone. And there's something exciting about who knows where the night's going to lead and what's going to happen. And it happened quite a bit also when I was out of school. After I graduated and I was living in the city. Drank a lot too, and I had to. I think I realized when I was living in Seattle, which is already 5 years ago, that I had to slow down really. And I was drinking heavily, and especially because it was during COVID, and I was just at home with my roommates, I was drinking heavily and frequently. And I just wanted to stop. I really did. I just thought that, whatever this is getting out of hand. Not like I needed it to be social. It's not like I, was constantly craving like, I just have to get drunk. I have to get drunk. I have to get drunk. But there were a lot of times where I was like, you know what? I could really just use a taste of like a sip of beer, or I get home and I can use a cold, shot of whiskey, put take a glass, put some ice in it, and just savor it for a couple of minutes. So we'll see what it's like without that. Um, I tried to I decided to do it. I guess the day before October 1st, which was today's Wednesday. This was Monday afternoon. I was going crazy sitting at home, and there was a lot going on with work, and and a lot going on in the house at the same time. I was like, I just have to get out. So I went to this Irish pub and got a Guinness on tap, and this place pours Guinness. First of all, they pour it properly. Apparently, Guinness, which is that famous Irish light stout, about 4% alcohol, about 100 calories per pour. Dark beer that the Irish and English are known for drinking, but mostly the Irish, they're very proud of their Guinness. Apparently, it's a special. It's called a nitro beer, and they have a certain level of nitro and carbonation. That's not standard, and so the way that you pour it is the way you're supposed to pour it is you're supposed to pour it and let the nitrogen settle for a couple of minutes after once the pour is three-quarters way done, and then after that, then you pour the rest of it, and then you kind of get that nice little milky froth on top. It's called head, and that's like, and a Guinness poured well is awesome. And so apparently this place called the Fields in Hollywood, right by the Fort Lauderdale airport, they apparently sell over 1,000 pours, pints of Guinness a week. And because of that, they're always getting the most fresh. They're getting Guinness straight from Ireland, and they're constantly getting fresh kegs and fresh shipments of it. So I sat down and I was doing work at this pub and I had a Guinness and I was like, this is delicious. This is just so great. And the next day I saw that it was October 1st and someone posted about Sober October on Twitter. I was like, well, that was my last hurrah. That may have been my last beer for the next month. So let's enjoy. So I don't know if I'm actually gonna, be able. I don't know if I will stick it all the way through. I think I have to be able to. Like there's no way I'm not capable of it. Just whether I want to or not, but I do want to. So we'll see how it goes. The other thing that, there are a couple other things that I was thinking about just in general recently. One of the things was I've been listening to a podcast from Daryl Cooper, a guy named Daryl Cooper, called the Martyr Made podcast. And this podcast is remarkable. And I just I want to express, he does, he does such a magnificent job, of research, just that alone, a staggering amount of research you can tell has gone into this because he covers a huge variety of historical events and topics, and he does deep dives, but not into what the conventional storyline is. His general rule is that he won't cover a topic unless he can really place himself in everyone's shoes that are involved in the historical event. So the first one I listened to was the Israel-Palestine conflict called Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem. I super highly recommend it. I do not think that if no matter what, quote unquote, there's very few people I think in the world today that are agnostic about this argument. I feel like everyone has an opinion about one way or another what the story is, and he doesn't present an opinion, but he does present both opinions and create emotional relatability to both sides of the story, and provides enormous context from everyone's perspective. And there are some things that just made me proud and understand, and there's some things that I felt validated in hearing, and there's certain things that I did not want to hear at all. I didn't want to hear it at all. I was not. It's not that I wasn't ready to hear it. It's that I was shocked. I was like, I didn't know that. That the Israelis, early Zionists and Israelis behaved X, Y, and Z way. I didn't know about this story about the Hebron massacre. I didn't know this about that. And I didn't know this about the Jerusalem bombing and the King David bombing rather. And there's just so much that I just had no idea about. And there's and I think and I've been thinking a lot about it because when you're being confronted about something that is literally something you've been told your whole life. I've been to Israel probably a dozen times in my life, maybe more. And my family is enormously proud of Israel as a country, as a home for the Jewish people, and coming from a family that has both my mom's parents were Holocaust survivors, and to have Holocaust survivors in direct connection to to World War II, the anti-Semitism. My whole family grew up always emphasizing over and over and over again that it's how important it is that the Jews have Israel as a home. And the podcast, in fact, the podcast validated my opinion on that, or my thoughts on that, or my view on that. He did a beautiful job of validating that. But then he also presented the other side, which is just, I understand you need a home, but what are all these people that were here for a couple hundred years supposed to do? And what about their home? And where are they supposed to go? And, and then, and when you're going all the way back, and you could talk about Hamas today or Hezbollah today, but you're going all the way back to the early 1900s, to 1915, 1920, 1930, you didn't have Hamas or Hezbollah at that point. You didn't have like these radical organized Islamic terrorist organizations. In fact, a lot of the Jewish organizations were actually terrorists at the time, because they felt like that was the only way in a world that the Jews were constantly being rejected, in the world of the Holocaust, in the world of the pogroms, that we have to almost bully our way into getting our own land, because if not, the whole world's going to destroy us. And I just thought he did such a phenomenal job, just being so fair to everyone and being so even keeled, and just really, really, really going into the nuances and the depths and just presenting both sides. And he said at the end, his goal is just to get everyone to understand where everyone else is coming from. And I think he did a spectacular, spectacular job about that, with that. So it's not something, I wouldn't say this podcast, if you have to be open-minded if you're listening to it. And you have to be willing to hear realities that you may not like, but this is coming from an objective, or from what seems to be, what he tries to be, what he seems very authentic in, and just a very honest attempt at neutrality and just dissecting a story and breaking it down, because I didn't know any of this stuff. I mean, I am not involved in Israeli. I'm not. I don't actively follow Israeli politics. I don't really care about that. I love the place. I love the people. I love I love visiting. I love the food. I love the geography. I've walked across the country. I mean, it's only like, I think it was like 45 miles, something like that. But I walked across the whole country before, from river to the river, um, and with a bunch of buddies. And I was in Israel when I was studying there for the year, and it was really a remarkable event. But I love the place, but I didn't know any of this. And the truth is that the past is not always as pretty as we like to admit. But I think that we're better by being honest, and I think we're better by saying, "Listen, I wasn't always perfect. We weren't always perfect. Our perspective wasn't always perfect. There was a reason why, and I'm not saying that we're just doing, we just existed to be bullies and existed to be terrorists originally, and now all of a sudden, that never happened. But but to say, like, listen, it's important that we face the truth about, the way that we used to behave. It's important that we own up to our part of history that we're responsible for. And then we can get closure and have a better world for today and tomorrow, and for our family and for our kids. And that's really what everyone only wants. That's what the state of Israel is for. It's to be a homeland for, the world and the Jewish vision of the state of Israel is, to be a home for all Jews, and we need it, and for a better tomorrow, and for a life, and for a safe place to go if there's another event where the world turns their back on us. So I understand where they're coming from, but it doesn't mean that the ends always justify the means. The means don't always justify the end. The ends don't always justify the means. Yeah, that's right. So it really gave me a lot to think about. A lot of things. It made me very uncomfortable, but I think being uncomfortable is good. I think being uncomfortable is important. I think that it means that you're getting somewhere real. And some of the most uncomfortable things I had to do with my life led to some of the best results. So, discomfort, I don't think is anything to necessarily steer away from if you don't need to. Steer towards if you don't need to. But there are going to be times where it's really important to kind of embrace your discomfort and say, like, there's a reason why this makes me uncomfortable, and I should really, really just be thoughtful about what that is. Um, and yeah, and he has this. So I just started his other series, which is based on the Johnstown. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Johnstown cult, um, the cult that ultimately ended in over 900 people committing suicide or murder, and as a group, all ending their lives together. Um, oh my God! And I don't understand how this guy did this, because he sifted through hundreds of hours of material about the cult, but he also listened to audio tracks, and he also listened to recordings, because I guess the cult was meticulous about keeping track of their of who they were and their, their meetings, their history, whatever. Um, and he had to listen to people hurting themselves and babies crying and people dying, and I don't know how he's able to do that too. I don't. So he put at the end. He has basically. I don't know how many parts the series is. Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem was 6 parts. Um, but at one point in the first episode, which of the Johnstown Cult, which is basically an introduction to the context of, what about society allowed the cult to exist. Um, he was talking. One thing that he did was he put in for just a couple of seconds, he put in the video, or the audio rather, of the final moments where people were dying after they'd swallowed cyanide or drank the poison Kool-Aid or whatever it was. And there were babies that were crying in the background. Like you hear like just, the audio of just someone talking or saying something. It was hard for me to make out because the sound of the baby crying was just so like, and knowing what was going on was so, it really struck something so primal in me. I've always been sensitive to, I mean, it's interesting. I'm very, there's like, I have different experiences with with different emotional events when I process them, either listening to them or speaking them out. And there's something about speaking out something that's emotional or vulnerable that I could type or I could write or I could think or I could feel, but something about speaking it out is just totally different, and it really strikes me in a different way. And just hearing a baby cry when I have a 1.5-year-old, I couldn't listen to it. And I couldn't I couldn't keep on I couldn't keep on going with that. And if this guy's even remotely like me, and he seems to be a sensitive kind of guy, um, he I don't know how he did it. And either he thought that it was so important that he does his podcast that he himself will have to suffer in order to make the story more well known and to elaborate on it to make sure that we don't repeat it and that we know about it. Or he just has a higher tolerance for maybe he's better at disassociating himself. But I don't think that he's like that, because if you're good at disassociating yourself, then you're not good at presenting both sides of an argument, especially something like, let's say 35 or 40 hours on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before 1948. Like, imagine how much had happened after 1948 that, that we can get in, that he could get into, that, that you could talk about 40, you could talk about 48, you could talk about 67, you could talk about the 2000s, you could talk about 2014, you could talk about, you could talk about today, I mean, there could be hundreds, dozens of hours of audio about October 7th, 2023 until today, right now, and all the context and all the nuance, and and the political landscape in Israel beforehand and during and after, and Israel's relationship to Hamas, and Iran in the mix, and what do they have to do with anything, and you could do so much, and this is 35, 40 hours that really had me reeling, at certain points. And it was all before, I didn't even know that that was even a relevant part of the story or the history. I was never aware that let's say 1910 to 1945 were such pivotal years in this conflict. But so much of what's going on today stemmed from that. I had no idea. So I'm really very impressed with everything that he did. I started teaching my high school class. Um, I hope no one gets sick of me talking about my high school class, and if you do, I would love feedback about that, because the only people that really listen to this are people that already know me and have my phone number for the most part. But you could always, respond to me or share or comment or whatever. But um, I try to teach my classes in a very organic way and a very natural, with a natural progression. right? So, for example, like we went from talking about the quote unquote anxious generation, which was people's dependency on social media and how it rewires our brains to make to it rewires our brains and our pleasures and our reward systems to things that are not necessarily in our best interest or so healthy for us. And we went from that to a book called Hope for Cynics, and from the which is exactly what it sounds like. Hope for people that tend to look at for a society and for individuals that tend to look at the world with the worst potential possible outcomes, the worst expectations in mind, not trusting people, not trusting society, not trusting authorities or agencies, and not even not trusting them, but just expecting like the worst outcome. Expect that people will always behave the worst way possible. That the everything is a collusion, everything is a conspiracy, and everyone's out to hurt everyone. And how to kind of question that and to help relieve people from that train of thought, and um, and so that was a kind of a crossover between our being now we're talking about the way that we're rewired to the way that we've kind of become, in different ways that that we kind of look at one another and interact with one another. And then one class kind of led a little bit more into a little bit of a deeper version of that. We talked a little bit about censorship, responsibility, stuff like that. In the other class, we veered off into another direction, um, which was the song "Father and Son" by Cat Stevens, which I've mentioned. But it's about the misunderstanding between a father and a son, while the son wants to live his own life and the father wants nothing more than his son to just avoid pain and to be responsible, and he's trying to help guide him through life to be productive. And the son doesn't understand, doesn't want to listen. It's not, he understands that the father, what worked for the father, but he has to pursue his own life and go down his own path. And and we started talking about that, and then we talked about what does it mean to be vulnerable, and who can we be vulnerable to, and who is it good to be vulnerable to in life or not, which led us into Simon and Garfunkel's "I Am a Rock," which is an amazing song. I love Simon and Garfunkel, and actually, I think they're underrated in today's world because they're a beautiful combination of singing poetry and just great acoustic, soft guitar playing. And the song "I Am a Rock" is about someone that got hurt, and he shuts himself off to friendship, to love. But the thing that we noticed, and the thing that we were able to elaborate on, is that the way that a lot of songwriters structure their music is they'll start a song by creating a setting for the audience to help set the tone for the rest of the audience. So the song starts. "I Am a Rock" starts a winter's day in a deep and dark December. Um, I am alone, gazing from my window to the streets below. And something along the lines of staring at a path of freshly fallen snow. Then I am the rock. I am an island. And what that first verse does. If anyone, if you're like me at all, and you like the music and you like to listen to lyrics and see what the author or the musician's trying to tell you, is obviously someone's going through a hard time, and it's a very bleak setting, and get ready to dive into this very bleak world of a winter's day in a deep and dark December, and it's cold and it's snowy outside, and this is what, and this is how you feel, and this is what the world looks like when you're vulnerable to the wrong people and you're vulnerable in the wrong way. And and so like everything, so all those classes, I didn't plan on teaching all this stuff when I started the year, which is kind of funny. I didn't plan on teaching all this stuff at the beginning of the year. I wasn't really sure where I was going to go, but but based on the interest in the class and my ability to hold the students' attention for an extended period of time, I was able to really come, come up with material as was necessary, as I needed, because I was just able to see, okay, this is what they're interested in. Let me find more of what would kind of flow with that, and we could go from topic to topic. Um, So after I'm Iraq, I noticed that the class was enjoying breaking down lyrics, being thoughtful about them, being thoughtful about what kind of stories being told, told. And excuse me, I have no idea what's the matter with me. But so before class, I would just I tend to get there a couple minutes early, listen to some music, try to introduce the class to some rock music, and um, and I played a great song called Atlantic City, by originally written by Springsteen in 1980 on his album called Nebraska. And that story is also an amazing story. Springsteen was, he just fit, actually 1982? 1982. 1980 was the river. Um, Springsteen just came up with three back-to-back albums of hard, fun rock music, and even the songs that are slower and sadder primarily were big band, full rock and music. And he did all these legendary tours, and he'd play for 3, 4, 5 hours. But this is three albums from 1975 to 1980 and 82. So this is almost 7 years of his life in kind of the same zone. If you think about like 7 years of your life, from 25 to 30, 32, 24 to about 30, at a certain point, like, you change a lot, you really do. I think that you change less as you get older and older. So, I bet the difference between the way that someone thinks from the age of 40 to 47 is probably really different than the way that the amount of change, or a lot more stagnant, rather, it's a lot more similar than the way that someone feels from the age of 25 to 35, or 25 to 32. So Springsteen was being much more. He's always thoughtful, but he didn't want to do a whole big band album. He wanted to do something a little different, something that told a little bit more of a real and emotional story. That it's a little harder to access with the big band, because with the big band you tend to get distracted by the music, and you get distracted by everything that's going on, all the dynamics of all the players, and and then sometimes less is more, and sometimes more is less. So he decided to record this album called Nebraska, which basically just talked about a lot of hardships. And he used a one-track recorder, and it was pretty much essentially just him in his room, or in his own homemade studio, with an acoustic guitar, and just this one recorder. And he made, and Highway Patrolman's a beautiful song, My Father's House, and Nebraska, of course. And then there's a song called Atlantic City, which he later on, when he was, Reasons to Believe is another great one. But when he was, so then he never did a full tour for that Nebraska album. He did, what he did was he came out with the album in 1982, and then 84, he released another album, Born in the USA, which is probably his most commercial album, most famous album. And that's when he really went from being a rock star to being like an absolute superstar, and he was selling out stadiums all over the world. And, and he would kind of take the bare bones songs, or some of the bare bones songs, and create, and recreate that song for the band. And Atlantic City is one of them. Atlantic City is, in the original demo, is really just a medium paced acoustic guitar, and it's just him, with, it's himself singing, and I think it's either him or Steven Van Zandt giving little howls in the background, just to like emphasize different aspects of, of pain and challenges and anxiety. And um, and that, so he turned that into a big band song, and that song quickly became extremely, extremely popular with with Springsteen fans. And then the band, which is the Bob Dylan's band, the legendary Great Waltz, was a movie that was directed by It was a concert directed by Martin Scorsese. That the band was originally going to retire, and they got all these incredible musicians to come play in their goodbye concert in San Francisco, I believe. I think it was in San Francisco. And and then the band eventually got back together. Rick Danko and Robbie Robertson, and there's a couple other guys who I totally don't remember their names right now. It's going to come to me later. I'm going to be upset at myself. But I didn't even plan on talking about this, so I didn't really prep. And so the band covered that song, and that version of the song became the pop, or the pop, the real, the because unless you had a version of Springsteen's concert, a bootleg version of his concert, the only other version that was pretty much available was this Nebraska version, which didn't really embody that whole spirit that Springsteen initially had. Sorry, that didn't later have when he was playing the song live. So the band put a real cool spin to it. They have mandolin in it. They have a cool percussion. It's a little bit less intensive than the drums that that Max Weinberg uses, who's Springsteen's drums player. And they use an accordion instead of a synthesizer, and they just get like a really, really cool. I don't even know how to describe the type of music that it is, but it's a very, very, it's a great sound. It's really, really cool. Um, it's kind of like country-ish, I guess. I guess all those instruments are kind of country instruments. But regardless, so I was listening to the band's version of the song. Students walked in, as they slowly piled into class, and and a couple of them react positively to the song. I like it, or they're kind of like tapping tapping their feet or bouncing their head along to the beat. Um, and I'm encouraged by this. So I say, should we break down the song today? They said sure, and the song, it turns out, is a remarkably crafted story. Aside from it being an amazing song in and of itself, it's a remarkably crafted story about a mafia fight, and in the 20, I believe it was the 20s. Could have been a little bit later, but I think it was around the 20s. There was a mafia boss in Philadelphia named the Chicken Man, or nicknamed the Chicken Man rather. And at the time, Vegas was just not Vegas, Atlantic City was becoming a legal, the Vegas of the East, right? There's like legal gambling, casino centric area, and obviously that kind of money and that kind of opportunity really brings in mafia members. Brought up piked the interest of the mafia, and they and there was a fight between the New Jersey mafia and the Philadelphia mafia, um, for I guess the casino rights, or who's going to run that neck of the woods. And so the song starts off. They blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night, and they blew up his house too. Down on the boardwalk, they're getting ready for a heck of a fight, or a hell of a fight. We're gonna see what those racket boys can do. So, like what we said about the Simon and Garfunkel song, the Atlantic City starts off by setting a mood. There's a lot of tension in the air. A mafia man, dies in an accident. His whole house blew up. Who knows if someone else was in the house or not? And on the boardwalk, can you imagine at nighttime, these gangsters running up and down, the boardwalk, or are getting ready for some kind of violent shootout, or some kind of just full out mafia war. And then the protagonist of the story comes along, and the protagonist of the story is basically a young man, a young married man that has the kind of debts that no honest man can pay. He was like, I got a job and I try to put my money away. So this guy's a hardworking, honest guy. He saves the money he could, and he pays off the debts that he could, but he doesn't have enough money to do it. Now again, late 20s, crash, Great Depression. Um, and so, what happens when the system of just working regular, honest, hard work doesn't doesn't cut it anymore? Which I think a lot of people actually kind of relate to today in America, just in terms of just crippling, cost of food and housing and everything. And so this guy says, I just can't, I can't make it doing this honest work, and I have to. And so last night I met a little guy. I'm going to do a little. I met a guy. I'm going to do a little favor for him, and he decides to turn his back on the straight life, and for the sake of himself and his wife and his family, he's going to join. He's going to join the mob, and and that's going to lead this clash straight into the into mafia history, which I'm very excited about because I love talking about the mafia. And one thing that we were talking about, because I think I have to thank Daryl Cooper and the Martyr Made podcast for this, is that like it's really important to understand where the mafias, the context. Like, listen, there's different mafias, right? You got the Irish mafia, you got the Italian mafia, you got the Jewish mafia, you have the black mafias, you have Russian mafias, all these mafias and all these, crimes or these, formal, officially crime organizations were really made up they consisted of people that came from places that were historically pretty oppressed. I mean, Italy and Ireland, were some of the most oppressed. I know about I don't know enough about Italian history, but I do know that they that in the last couple hundred years they were far from flourishing, and they were they were subject to the citizens felt like the government was not doing the job protecting them, and so these mafia families had to kind of form to kind of step in and do what the government wouldn't do, and um, the same goes for the Irish. The Irish have constantly been broke people that were constantly being, for the last couple hundred years, constantly at war with England and with, Northern Ireland is constantly going back and forth between being Italian, English sovereignty or Italian or Irish sovereignty, and and those people kind of became these bare boned, brawling tough guys because they really had to be in order to fend for themselves. And the same thing goes to the Jewish ones, because same story, and that's what Daryl Cooper was talking a little bit about in terms of the early Zionists, where these were, I mean, Jews in the 1920s, 1930s were, enormously a part of, even especially in America, there was a Jewish mob, there were Jewish boxers, there were, these were like tough, serious guys that really were fending for themselves. And the Jewish mobsters existed until, till today. Meyer Lansky, I think, either just died or is still alive, and he's from Miami. Um, so we went through as we looked at a map, and we were going through each individual area and talking about like what's the context? Why are these people going through? What have these people gone through to make them want to turn them back on the straight life? And what have they gone through to want to turn their back and not trust the government and not trust the people that are quote unquote in charge of them, or the people that are quote unquote taking care of them. How come they don't believe them, and why do they want to take matters into their own hands? So we're gonna get into that. I'm really excited about that because that's a ton of fun. Um, but yeah, the pod has been a ton of fun. I'm glad I had 3 or 4 new guests in a row recently. I had Dan, I had Leo, I had Ellie. Um, each one was great and brought a lot of cool diversity to the table. I didn't know where any of the conversations were going to go, and it was just so much fun. So I really, really had a wonderful time with that, and I hope to just be able to keep this up. This is awesome. So I'm going to call it here because it is 3 o'clock, 2:30 on before a holiday, and I only have another couple hours to get ready, and I have a lot of chores to do that I'm not being entirely responsible about. So this will be it for the next couple of days. I will probably be back on Sunday or Monday, I guess, next week. So bye for now, everyone. Have a good week.